Okay, we should be live. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Roger Paul, and tonight we're going to continue our study with the origin, history, and destiny of the universe reality. This is part 13. I said last week it was part 13, but I was one ahead of myself. So this is actually part 13 tonight. So let's say a little prayer and we'll get started for tonight. Father, thank you for bringing us together tonight. We thank you for this wonderful revelation. Open our hearts and minds that we might remember a little bit of this and be with me tonight to make sure I explain this properly, because this is hard subjects. And pray that you'll continue blessing those who have been in the storms or coming out of the storms, and those that survived. We thank you for your many blessings. We say this in the name of Michael, Jesus of Nazareth. Amen.
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 Okay. Here we go. I'm going to start out with this little chart. As y'all probably remember, let me go back one here. We're in the second section of the universe absolute. Remember that? Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to show this picture to get started tonight to kind of remind us of where we were when we ended last time. And this is the three manifestations of the universal Father. The reason I wanted to bring this out is I'm going to show y'all another chart in just a second. But what I wanted to bring out on this is the fact that the three absolutes that we are talking about right now, the deity absolute or the qualified absolute, the universal absolute, and the unqualified absolute, are actually part of manifestations of the universal Father himself. Okay? But they are considered the seven absolutes. And I'm going to stop the share and show y'all this picture real quick from the forward.
Hi, Tiffany.
Hi, Tiffany. Okay. And this is a picture. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger so y'all can see it all. Bring it back down just a
Hi
little.
everyone.
Hi,
Hi,
Tiffany.
Hi,
Tiffany.
Tiffany.
Sorry,
Nice
I'm
to
a
have you
bit
with us.
slow because I need to unmute.
That's okay.
Sorry.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. This is what's called the ultimate integration of reality. That's partly what these slides are, the title of these slides are about. And it says currently split into the seven absolutes. Now, the thing I want to bring out is this: the seven absolutes, you'll notice down here, that are the things we're talking about right now: the qualified absolute, the universal absolute, and the unqualified absolute. These are all part of the universal Father, even though they're different segments of the seven absolutes. In reality, all the seven absolutes are part of the universal Father.
Of course.
Okay. And I wanted to bring that up before we kept going on. I wanted to kind of get that in y'all's minds that these are not really separate things. In essence, they're a separate thing from the Father, but they're part of the Father too. Kind of like the original Son and the conjoint actor are. These two have different personalities that they obtain from the Father, and so does the qualified and the universal absolute. They have different personalities that they obtain from the Father. But the unqualified absolute and the nuclear Isle of Paradise has no personality, and it is not deified reality. Okay.
Mhm.
Where everything else, the other absolutes, are all deified reality. They're part of deity. Okay. And in essence, the unqualified absolute is part of deity, but is not deity. Just like the Isle of Paradise is part of deity, but it is not deified. It's not deity. Makes sense?
More physical.
More physical. It's the finite, in essence, part of that.
Hmm.
All right. Let me stop
So,
share. Yeah.
what were they called again? I know it's the seven absolutes, but
It's
something
seven,
about quality.
seven absolutes of infinity. okay, or reality. Yeah. Let me share it again. We'll go back here for a second. Yeah, see, it says split into the 7 absolutes of infinity.
Ultimate integration
Of reality. In other words, everything in reality is integrated in these 7 absolutes. There's nothing outside these 7 absolutes. Okay? An important part of this too is, well, you can see all the other screens I got home. Another important part of this is the fact that the finite reality as we know it is also part of the unqualified absolute and the deity of everything else. Okay? Let me go back over here for just a second and reset this. Okay, we're back where we started. All right, but you'll notice on this slide, it says the deity absolute, that's why it's called qualified. It's qualified by deity. Okay, so that's why it's qualified, called the deity absolute, qualified absolute. The universal absolute, however, is the thing that because of the tension of deity and the tension of non-deity, the universal absolute is required to bring these two together, because the unqualified absolute, or the non-deity part of absolute, is that thing that brings the finite reality, and that includes all the primordial matter and everything that pulls out from paradise to create universes. That is all non-deity reality. It's part of the finite reality. So you can kind of see how, because we're in a local universe that's being created right now, the unqualified absolute is very active in our local universe. And the universal absolute is bringing this deity part, which is what? Jesus in this sense, or Michael in the local universe, Mother Spirit. It's bringing that into the unqualified or the finite part that is not deified, so that the universal absolute can deify that area to the point where it can be manipulated by Jesus or Michael and the local universe Mother Spirit, right? And we know before even that happens, the architect of the master universe has to make this matter available for them to manipulate. Okay?
Roger,
Yeah.
does the unqualified absolute work in the central universe?
Yes. Yes. Everything works. Let me put it this way. The unqualified absolute in essence had to work from paradise outward.
That's what I figured.
Yeah.
I mean, once there's paradise, it's
Yeah.
an unqualified absolute.
That's right. Right.
Hmm.
Okay, so everything outside paradise has to have the unqualified absolute to manipulate it, to bring it into the source it is. Even if you think about it, even Havona, because it was in essence eventuated at the same time as the infinite spirit. It had to be there as a precursor for the infinite spirit and Jesus, and or not Jesus, but the eternal Son and God to create the Havona, because it has a material essence, right? Anything that's got material in it has to have the unqualified absolute.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. We'll go up here. So we're back to this slide. Can y'all read that pretty good?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
It's small, but
it's small.
get my magnifying
Can you read
glass.
that, dear?
I can read
but
it.
hi,
You want to take the
Dr.
first?
Paul.
Yes.
The quality.
So
If
I have a question.
Yeah, go right ahead.
I'm sorry, because I have to say my English is not really my first language.
That's fine.
So I wonder when we talk about tension, uh,
Yes.
is there an analogy that can help me to understand better?
Yes. Yes. Do you understand magnetism, Tiffany? What
Yeah,
magnets are?
right.
Really, you can think of the tension as the invisible force of the magnet pulling something toward it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so you would think of the tension between the magnet and the metal. That would be an example of this tension we're talking about that's pulling these two things together, the magnet and the metal is totally different than the magnet, but the magnet has a force that pulls the magnet into it, right? So
Right.
that force you could think of that brings the magnet together with the metal would be considered a tension.
Yeah, if you
Mm,
help apart and they want to
Yeah,
come together,
yeah. If you
but
get
it's
them even close, you can feel them pulling to each other, right?
mm,
So
right.
that tension that they're talking about here is is a force that brings the deity to the non-deity or the deity to the finite. I'm saying non-deity, but really it's if you think about it, it's the finite matter that has no deity. It's that the universal absolute is that force that kind of brings the deity into the finite or the undeity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Mm,
Creates a tension, right? It's like a tension between the two so that they forevermore keep trying to draw together. And that tension has to be there even after the universes are created, even like the finite universes, because that tension is part of the whole, and part of that whole is the gravity of paradise. Okay. So you can almost think of the unqualified absolute working with the gravity of paradise that brings everything towards paradise. Make sense? And
mm,
that's that same tension that brings all the planets towards the suns, all the universes towards each other and everything, and they would collapse on in everything in essence if it wasn't for what's called universal respiration. Okay. And the thing that universal respiration does is it's a breathing in and a breathing out of all material of all the universes. Does that make sense?
yes.
of the grand universe.
Of the grand universe. Right.
Mm.
Okay.
Roger,
Yeah.
so the unqualified absolute works with the automaton.
Yes. It works all the way down, all the way electronically, all the way down to every part of matter to the uh, very lowest part of the automatons, the
So I
neutrons, the
have a
atoms.
question there
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
The automaton is the very smallest particle of matter that exists.
Yes.
But yet, and I think they said that even in space, you will find one automaton per unit of space.
Yeah. At least I think it's 100 automatons, if I remember correctly.
But it
Per,
makes you
per
wonder what the space in between is, what space is. It's not material.
It's not material. It's like a nothingness. It's the backdrop for the universes, if you think about it.
It
But
would be gravity, wouldn't it?
nothing
No,
has
it would have a gravity in it, but the space itself, there is a space. They used to call it the ether. Okay, that's what the 1930 definition of it was. the ether. That was space that had nothing in it, nothingness. Okay. But we know that nothing in the universe from the Urantia book is empty. Okay, so that's why what Rodney's talking about, the ultimate times, I believe there's, if I remember, I could be wrong on that, Rodney, but I believe it's 100, there's at least 100 ultimatons in every square inch of space.
Something like that.
Something like that. All right. So there is no such thing as a void or a vacuum. Okay. We call it a vacuum out in space because of the lack of matter within that. And in reality, there is matter in it because there's ultimatons in it. So it's not really a vacuum. It reacts like a vacuum, like something we would think would be a vacuum, but in reality, it's not. That's not the case at all. It actually has material in it. Does that make sense? And without that material in it, no matter what we did, like Elon Musk sending these rockets up, if it was a complete vacuum, everything that he sent up there, anything that had air inside of it would collapse. Okay, just like it does in the ocean. The ocean has, the deeper you get, the more atmospheres you have, right? You know that from scuba diving.
Atmospheric pressure.
Yeah, the pressure gets more and more. And so if you have air inside an empty shell of any kind, a can, submarine, whatever, if the pressure on the outside gets more than the pressure on the inside can maintain, regardless how thick your walls are, it collapses. Okay, just like a beer can or a Coke can. Okay.
But wouldn't in space, the opposite would be true?
That
The
in space,
the vessel would explode because of the
pressure inside compared to the outside.
Yes.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You would assume that would be the case.
But well, they've obviously engineered the capsules and the stuff to withstand the pressure.
Right. Not only that, but the spacesuits, they use the spacesuits, they develop those in pools underwater. So just like you learn to scuba dive, when you learn to scuba dive, you do everything underwater in a pool, but you can only get the one atmosphere because most pools are not deeper than 15 feet. Okay. So, but that's how they develop these space suits, because they can test them out because the atmosphere is different than the atmosphere on the outside. Makes sense?
I was just wondering how many atmospheres they have to make these suits stand to go out in space.
I have no idea.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, I really don't know. You could probably look that up. Yeah, sure, it's out there. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to get through our explanation of the universal absolute. So now we understand that the universal absolute is one of the seven absolutes, and it's all part of God the Father, right? If you look at it this way, this stuff doesn't become so esoteric, does it? It's just part of the personality of God the Father. So let's take that first paragraph, dear, if you can read it.
Universal absolute.
Yeah, the universal absolute.
Okay, universal absolute. Associative resolving absolute. The universal absolute we logically deduce was inevitable in the universal Father's absolute free will act of differentiating universe reality into deified and undeified, personalizable and non-personalizable values. The universal absolute is the deity phenomenon indicative of the resolution of the tension created by the free will act of thus differentiating universe reality, and functions as the associative coordinator of these sum totals of existential potentialities. The tension. Okay.
Okay. See if we can explain this now. The reason they say the universal absolute, logically we do, was inevitable is because of the free will of God the Father. In other words, because it was God's free will and he willed something to be, is why this is divided into three different absolutes. Okay? God the Father could have decided, I will all three of these functions, the qualified, the universal, and the unqualified, all to be one function together, and that's the way it would be. But that's not what he chose to do, because he had certain purposes of doing these in three separate things. Okay. And that's what they're telling us here. It's the absolute free will of God the Father act to differentiate these universe realities into two different things, actually four different things: the deified and the undeified. The deified would be the deity absolute or the qualified absolute, and the undeified would be the unqualified absolute, right? So he chose to set it up as two separate things. He also chose to set it up as personalizable and non-personalizable. In other words, one has personality and the other does not. Okay, so the qualified absolute and the universal absolute has personality. The unqualified absolute does not. It just is. Okay, so if you think of the unqualified absolute, it's a reaction to the universal absolute, okay, because it has no free will. It's not got personality. Makes sense?
Mhm.
It's the part of God the Father that is totally physical, finite, and it's there to set up the universes. That's its main function. And it's there to allow finite reality to interact with deity reality. Okay? Without the unqualified absolute, there would be no 7 super universes. Okay? Because there would be no way to bring them together. All right. And it says right here, the universal absolute is the phenomena indicative of the resolution of what? The tension created by the free will act of thus differentiate universe reality and functioning as a associated coordinator to the totals of the existential potentialities. What does that mean? In other words, it's the universal absolute that makes it possible for the potentials that God the Father foresees into the future, okay, the potentials of creation. It allows those potentials to become into full fruition eventually over time. And the universal absolute is the stepping stone or the tension that allows the future potentialities to become realities. Make sense? Everybody still with me? All right.
Why this wasn't in the original Bible.
Yeah, you can see why this wasn't in the original Bible. Nobody was there to explain it, right? People couldn't understand it.
So
Yeah, go ahead, Rodney.
when it said associate coordinator of these sum totals of existential potentialities,
Right.
what's the sum? So it's everything.
It's everything. Yeah, it is basically the thing that makes it possible for existential realities to come into existence.
Okay.
And we know that existential means never have a beginning, never has an end, right?
Mhm.
That's what existential is about. Okay, so this universal absolute allows the will of God or the potentials of God to become reality over time. And then once that becomes reality, it never ends. Right? Now, why is that important? So if you start billions of universes like we have starting in the outer space levels, when you have all these universes coming into full fruition, there is no possibility of them ever ending. And if you understand that, you understand why there's such a thing as universe respiration. Okay? If things never end, we can kind of understand the cycle of the circle or the oblong circle of the universe, right? Once it gets started in this roundabout thing of going on and on and on and on, it never ends. It's the potential that keeps it going forever. Everybody still with me?
Yes.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. Pam, can you read the next one?
The tension presence, the universal absolute signifies the adjustment of differential between deity, reality, and undeified reality inherent in the separation of the dynamics of free will divinity from the statics of unqualified affinity.
Okay. Now you see why we have to break all this stuff down so much. If you had no idea what we was talking about, this would be gobbledygook to you, wouldn't it? You know, you go,
Teach a 10-year-old this.
yeah, what the heck are they saying here, right? Okay. So the universal absolute, which is the thing we're talking about here, right? That's this thing up here at the top. The universal absolute, all right, the tension presence of it, because it's there, okay, because it just exists, the tension presence of it allows the adjustment of the differential, in other words, all the different parts of between deity reality, that which is God, and non-God, the undeified reality, in the inherent separation of the dynamics of free will divinity from static, unqualified infinity. And you're going, what the heck are they saying there, right? So what it does, it allows the undeified reality, which should be the unqualified absolute, right? It allows the undeified reality to be separate from the dynamics of free will and divinity. In other words, it allows the unqualified absolute to be totally separate from the free will choice of God the Father. Why is that important? Because if it was not separate from God the Father because of the will of God, it would all happen automatically and you couldn't separate the two. You can't change the will of God. So let me put it this way. Let's say it's the will of God that you become a preacher tomorrow. Okay? And if you fully accept the will of God in your life, what would happen tomorrow? You would be a preacher, right? If you did not have free will, because you could not choose. Because if God chose that that's what you were supposed to be doing, that's what you're going to do, regardless. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So because we have free will, we can choose something other than the will of God. The
Right.
deity, the unqualified absolute, does not have what?
Deity.
It doesn't have deity and it doesn't have free will, does it? That's why it doesn't have personality.
But has no will at all.
It has no will at all. Because if it did, what would happen? When God the Father made a choice, all right here it says the free will divinity from the static of the unqualified infinity. In other words, because it was the choice of God the Father, nothing in all infinity would keep it from happening as God's will would have it. Do you understand that?
Yeah, he chose this to happen.
That's right. He chose to separate part of himself away from his free will so that these things could happen separate from him and
Correct.
remain part of reality,
Wow.
the unqualified infinity.
He's
Okay?
not selfish.
No, he's not selfish. And that is why in the seven super universes, the reason that the sons of God and the daughters of God, which would be the local universe mother spirits, okay, the reason they are sovereign in their universes is because of these three absolutes.
I can understand that.
You understand that? Because if it wasn't for this separating these things out, then whatever God the Father willed would be, and there would be no use of having seven super universes. There would be no use in having 700,000 creator sons. There would be no use in having all these outer space levels because there would be no space for human beings to dwell. Do you see the difference?
Mhm.
Without the separation of these, there would be no reality outside deity. None,
Oh,
right? There would only be the reality of deity. Because of these, we have the reality of what? Absonite beings. We have the reality of finite beings. And we have the reality of paradise beings, all of which are unique and different. Okay? Does that make sense? Kind of a hard explanation, but if you think about it, you can grasp hold of it. Okay?
be hard to explain.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Good job, honey.
Yeah, I did a good job on that one?
Yeah.
Okay, you're still with me?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. Rodney, would you take the next little paragraph there? I think it's the longest.
Okay. 15:2. Always remember, potential infinity is absolute and inseparable from eternity. Actual infinity in time can never be anything but partial and must therefore be non-absolute. Neither can infinity of actual personality be absolute except an unqualified deity. And it is the differential of infinity potential in the unqualified absolute and the deity absolute that eternalizes the universal absolute, thereby making it cosmically possible to have material universes in space, and spiritually possible to have finite personalities in time. It's just what
Okay.
you were saying.
That's just what I was saying, right? Okay. They break out two different concepts here, right? They break out infinity from eternity. You see that?
Mhm.
All right. They don't consider them in self. It says potential infinity. What would be potential infinity? In other words, something that has the potential to be there forever, but has a start. That would be us, right? We're potential infinity, all right? But it is separate from eternity, okay? Because eternity already exists, right?
Eternity never had a beginning.
That's right, never had a identity, a beginning. But what they're telling us here, that absolute infinity is inseparable from eternity. You can't separate finite infinity from eternity. Once it starts, it's there, it's never stopping. Okay. But they also tell us here that actual infinity in time, like we're in time, can never be anything but partial and therefore be non-absolute. We are not absolute. We will never be absolute in the sense of always have been, always will be.
Right.
We can be eternal in the fact that because we started, we will go on forever, right? All right. Then it goes on to tell us that actual personality can be absolute except in the unqualified deity. You see that?
Hmm.
Why is that important? Because if the unqualified absolute had personality, then it would be possible for the unqualified absolute to have an end because it has a personality. All right. All right.
Well,
Then it goes on.
it would have a bad personality. It could have a will.
It would have a will. And if it had a will, we wouldn't have any way to connect the finite to the infinite, would it?
Correct. Okay.
You with me? But it doesn't have a will. It doesn't have a personality. Okay. Okay, so it's the fact that the deity absolute exists and the unqualified absolute exists because of the will of God, that because of those two things, that the universal absolute comes into existence. Okay? If it wasn't for the unqualified absolute and the qualified absolute or the deity absolute, there would be no need for something in between them to resolve the two. You see
That's
that?
correct.
That's right. All right. Then it goes on to tell us, thereby making it cosmically possible to have material universes in space and spiritually possible to have finite personalities in time. So the universal absolute makes it possible to have finite personalities in space. It makes it possible for us, but it also makes it possible to have spiritual beings in time also. So this is the connection point from us going from finite to Morancha to spiritual. Okay. So if you think about it, it's the tension from the finite that pulls us into the spiritual, and it's the tension from the deity absolute that pulls us from the finite, unqualified absolute into eternity. Okay? And it's going to kind of wrap this up in the next paragraph. Huh?
Curious, how are bodies, flesh and blood?
Uh-huh.
That would be unqualified.
That would be part of the unqualified. That's the physical matter being pulled into existence, right? Now, our physical bodies are all controlled by what? The infinite spirit and the Isle of Paradise.
Right.
Okay? But we have inserted within us our spiritual being, which part is the sun's universe, the eternal sun. That's our spiritual part. But it also has a part of God the Father's will and the fact that we fuse with the fragment of God, right? And we get our mind from the infinite spirit, which eventually comes through the cosmic mind, right?
Okay.
So all three parts are part of us. Make sense? Okay. Let's see. Gary, you're next. You want to take the next one? He's still out there.
This is almost like Trinity itself.
I'm going to skip reading.
Oh, okay, Gary, that's fine. Tiffany, would you like to take the next one?
Sure. So 15.3.
Right. Yeah.
Right. The finite can coexist in the cosmos along with the infinite only because the associative presence of the universal absolute so perfectly equalizes the tensions between time and eternity. Finity and infinity, reality potential and reality actuality, paradise and space, man and God. Associatively, the universal absolute constitutes the identification of the zone of progressing evolutional reality existence in the time-space and in the transcended time-space universes of sub-infinite deity manifestation.
Okay. So this universal absolute allows us to coexist with eternity as finite beings. Okay, so it's the glue that keeps everything together in essence. You see the real reason I wanted to go through these advanced concepts with everybody so that you get an overall picture of how they all fit together.
Definitely.
Okay? And it's difficult stuff. I'm not saying that this is easy stuff to learn. It's not. Okay, so it's the universal absolute. What does it do again? It equalizes the tension between time and eternity because we're time-space beings. It allows us to live in a universe that's actual eternity. Okay, so it's the tension that brings everything together, both time and space. And then it goes on to say finity, right? Finite, being finite, and infinity, that which is not finite. Okay, it also integrates the reality of the potential and the reality of actuality, what will eventually all end up being. So the actuality is the fruition of God the Father, where before that it's just the pressure of God's concepts waiting to evolve, right? All right, and it goes on to tell us that it is the identification zone of progressing evolution. You see that? it is because of this tension that things evolve over time. And that includes all the planets and everything else. Okay. So you can thank the universal absolute for all this evolution that we have to go through on this planet before we even get to the mansion worlds. Okay. So if you're sitting at home wringing your hands going, why is my life so terrible? Why is evolution going on this end? Well, you can thank the universal absolute.
Blame
Right?
it on it.
Yeah. You can blame it on that, right? Because it's this progressive evolution. It allows reality in time and space to transcend time and space from a universe of sub-infinite, less than perfect, right, to a deity manifestation. What brings on the deity manifestation? The creator sons and daughters. Okay? They create a backdrop for their local universes, which allows all of this to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
See how
Yeah.
all of it kind of comes together in a circle? All right.
Well, the qualified absolute used to be my best friend, but now the
Yeah.
universal absolute
Is your new best friend? I tell you what, my brain used to be my best friend, but
Taking a break right now.
teaching all this stuff makes you, wake up some things that hadn't been waking up in a long time. This is not easy stuff. Okay. So we're ready to move on to the unqualified absolute. Let me take that very first part myself. The unqualified absolute, the unrevealed physical absolute. Why is it called unrevealed? Because it's nothingness other than the action taken by pulling the material from paradise to out. And you will not know anything else about it except what's in this book. Okay? So it's unrevealed. The unqualified absolute unifies with the deity absolute in the universal absolute. So the unqualified absolute does nothing without going through the universal absolute to the qualified absolute. Okay? It doesn't, and in essence, it doesn't initiate action on its own. Okay?
Well, that's because the unqualified and the qualified can't mix.
That they can't mix, and the unqualified has no will to action.
There
Right?
has to be a buffer. So
That's right. Has to be a buffer zone between the two, and they shall never come together. Right? That's the way it's designed. Okay, Diane, would you take the next one?
Okay.
The unqualified absolute is non-personal, extra-divine, and undeified. The unqualified absolute is therefore devoid of personality, divinity, and all creator prerogatives. Neither fact nor truth, experience nor revelation, philosophy nor absolutity are able to penetrate the nature and character of this absolute without universe qualification. Let it be made clear.
That's good, dear.
Okay.
Let me explain that,
Okay.
and then we'll go on to the next paragraph. Okay, so this is what we were just talking about. The universal absolute is non-personal. It has no personality. It has no free will, right? All right. It's extra divine. It is not divinity or deity as the other absolutes are, just like paradise.
universal, but you meant unqualified.
Oh, that's what I meant, unqualified.
okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodney. Need somebody to help me stay straight here. Too many absolutes.
No,
Okay. Um, being devoid of personality, it's devoid of divinity and all creator prerogatives. Do y'all see that? So the unqualified absolute cannot create anything on its own. It's
it's like
devoid. Yeah,
dead matter.
it's like it's just there, right? All right. It says here that neither fact nor truth, experiences nor revelation, philosophy nor obscenity are able to penetrate the nature and character of this absolute without universe qualification. So it cannot learn anything on its own, can it? In other words, it can't comprehend the finite. It can't comprehend evolution. It can't learn truth. What is non-truth? What is truth? It can't do any of those things without the qualification of the universal absolute telling it to do so. Okay. It's a function more than anything else, right? All right, let's go on to the next one. Pam, would you take it from right there?
Sorry, Dr. Paul.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Tiffany.
I don't know if now is a good time I ask this question. How about I ask the question about if you think we can cover this in another session? Maybe another session we can talk about it.
No, we can talk about anything, anytime, Tiffany. That's what we're here for. So, what's your question?
Perfect. Because it just happened that today, I read about the thought adjuster,
Yeah.
and then in paper 107, 7.2, it says that if thought adjusters are not personalities having prerogatives of will and a power of choice,
That's
how then,
correct. Yeah.
how then, oh, and then it goes on says, how then can they select mortal subjects and volunteer to indwell these creatures of the evolutionary worlds?
That is a mystery in itself right there, that question.
Yeah, if they don't have will, how
Yeah, they don't have free will. It doesn't have free will because it gets its free will from us once we fuse with it, right? So we have to assume that any decisions the thought adjuster makes before it indwells a human being is the decisions of God the Father himself.
exactly.
Does that make sense?
What you would assume.
I don't know if that answered your question. What's your question?
So my question is, I understand the part where it says, if there's no personality, then you won't have free will, or you cannot choose.
Right.
Just like the unqualified absolute.
Yes, that's correct.
In this case. So that's why I wasn't sure about in the thought adjuster's case, how do they have no personality? Because they haven't had a personality yet until they fuse with the mortal mind.
That's
with the mortal.
That's correct.
How do they? So that's why I have that question.
Okay, well, let me explain something to you. The thought adjuster itself is not it is a fragment of God the Father. So the decisions that the thought adjuster makes pre-fusion with a human being is a decision made by God the Father himself. In other words, it does not have its own individual personality. So if you think about it, you have to think about it this way. God the Father, who is the source of all personality, has his own personality. And the way I justify this is this. since God the Father has his own personality by fragmenting himself in the thought adjusters, those thought adjusters have the ability, because it's a direct connection to God the Father, that's the only way they could function. If they lost that connection to God the Father, then they would be without will, without mind, without function, without anything else, right? So you have to assume that these thought adjusters, which are fragments, we have to keep coming back to the fact they're actual fragments of God. They indwell us for the full purpose of spiritualizing our life during the finite world, and then we fuse with them when we get to the mansion worlds, or on the way to the mansion worlds, one of the two. But when we fuse with them, that father fragment fuses with the personality of that individual, and that individual has built up its personality over time by being a finite being and experiencing things. Okay, so you can look at it this way: that thought adjuster is without personal human experience unless it indwelled another being before it came to you. And what's interesting is all the thought adjusters on this planet are those types of adjusters. So all those adjusters have lived an entire life with another being before he became your thought adjuster. So he's been through a lot of experience, but that experience becomes your experience when you fuse with that thought adjuster. So in essence, because the will of God is involved, that is probably why those thought adjusters can choose the individual it will next indwell, because it's a decision of God, the Father. Does that make sense, or did I confuse things more?
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you so much. I think I understand better now.
Good. Pam?
Roger,
Yeah.
my understanding from before said that the thought adjuster might have had experiences with others who
Yes.
didn't make it,
Right.
but they're not from our planet.
They're not from our planet. No.
Yeah.
Not a single one. No.
Yeah.
The only time a thought adjuster has been on this planet that was indwelled, a being from this planet, was Jesus's thought adjuster when he was indwelling Macaventa Melchizedek. And after he did that, he also indwelled Jesus. And then after that, he was personalized, because so he became the head of the thought adjusters on our planet after that. So
Wow.
yeah. So that's interesting. But that's a very good question, very thoughtful question, Tiffany, for sure. So
Yeah.
worth
Thank you.
worth stopping and talking about. All right, let's not, we're at 6:58, so we'll come back here
Okay,
next time. Okay,
cool.
where we are, and let's see here. Let me stop the share and go to the prayer of acceptance here. And Diane, would you like to read our prayer of acceptance tonight?
I believe that God is my paradise Father, and that only by faith am I saved. No sacrifice is necessary. By this same faith, I became a child of God, and know that all men and women are my brothers and sisters. We know the Son of God, the sovereign of our universe of Nebadon, as Christ Michael, Jesus of Nazareth. By allowing the will of God to become my will, I will someday stand in the presence of the Paradise Father. In the name of Christ Michael, Jesus of Nazareth. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. And
That's
thank you all from home that comes to listen to us. We have we just keep building. We had I think it was, what was it, 11,000 minutes of watched last month or something like that. We
Wow.
had 2,970 something views on, that's just YouTube. That doesn't include Vimeo and Facebook and, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of people listening to it. We appreciate you coming, and we appreciate everyone that is hanging in there on us on these lessons too. So let me say good night to everybody, and get together on Tuesday, and we will be studying paper 54, the lessons from the thought adjuster. So
Cool.
the lessons from the thought, lessons from the Lucifer effect.
A nice way to close.
Maybe I'll get my brain back by then.
Have a good night's sleep.
Yeah, really. Thanks, everybody. We love you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
You're welcome.
Thank